Hello and welcome to Core Finance. Today we are joined by Paul Griffiths, who is the CEO of Predator Oil and Gas. Paul, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
Paul, can you start by telling us how is 2021 going for you so far?
It's shaping up very well. We've got 3 projects that we're juggling with at present, keeping all on track, which is CO2 EOR in Trinidad, material drilling in Morocco, and also LNG in Ireland, FRSU LNG in Ireland. So it's a bit of a juggling, but we've worked ourselves through COVID-19 during the last year as active as ever. And I think one of the things that what I would say is that we may be fortunate about having to work, being able to work through this, but I think the key thing is our company was always structured in the right way for a situation like this. Nobody saw it was coming, but we always had a company structure from day one that allowed us to be relatively independent, work independently, and still run our operations. So we're in a fortunate position, is what I would say.
And has your company's strategy changed at all given current global conditions?
Absolutely not. It's always being focused on 3 things, which is the 3 projects I've just described, and trying to build value, and most importantly, building businesses that can be demonstrated have the capacity to grow. Nothing will change in that context at all.
Very good, thank you, Paul. And can you give us a bit more detail about your recent announcements?
For background, I think recently we've seen some better conditions really in the market, in the equity markets. There's the capacity for global growth now in the economies. Everybody will be rushing to pay back the COVID-19 costs, etc. We've seen oil prices increase. We've seen gas prices increase. We've seen 61 new licenses awarded in Norway this week. So there's a general feel-good factor, I think, for the sector that wasn't there certainly last year. So how does that feed into our 3 projects and RNS announcement? Well, let's start with CO2 EOR Trinidad, which is probably the most complex project anybody is likely to come across. But the key things there is that for 25 years, they've been talking about doing a CO2 EOR project in Trinidad, 25 years. So within 1 year, in January this month, we announced in that RNS successful pilot CO2 EOR. And what does that mean, in terms of value? Well, it means that we've demonstrated and de-risked CO2 EOR, which they couldn't manage to do in 25 years, or nobody took the decision to do in 25 years. And what does that mean in terms of growth of our business? Well, we can talk about barrels of oil per day. Yeah, great concept, great idea, fantastic. This is a pilot project on an area of 1 reservoir out of 5 reservoirs in the Herrera Sands, in the 84 block, in 10% of the area of the Innis Trinity field, and covering 1.3% of the primary recovery of that field compared to the 1.75 billion barrels recovered in nearby fields, in 13 nearby fields. So put it in that context, a tiny, tiny little step on the concept of developing a business. And, it still beggars belief. I've got 40 years in the business, so it's easy for me to understand, but it still beggars belief that there is still the odd person who likes to concentrate on how many barrels of oil per day did we produce at 9:05 Saturday morning. This is not about that. This is about risk, reward, and building a growth business. The secret is in growth and business. This is what it's all about. And the proof of the pudding is that we've already had 9 in-country operators and 2 international, of those 9, 2 international state oil companies requesting to look at our CO2 EOR services. So, hey, we must be doing something right and creating some value. But I will get my bucket out and send it down to Trinidad and ask them to see how many barrels they can get in the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, Paul. Well, it looks like you've been making lots of progress there, like achieving things that have been 25 years.
Exactly. So it was a very detailed announcement, and I don't pretend that everybody's going to understand it. And that wasn't the intention. The intention was we only give updates when we're comfortable that we have developed a step in our business growth plan. And those updates are aimed at also a different audience. And that audience is the people who might want to utilize our services. And in order for those people, professional people, to get involved, they have to understand the services. So it's a two-edged sword, the RNS. It's to deal with two different sets and groups of people, but that's in our shareholders' interest that, you know, that these companies are interested. If we could move to perhaps Morocco, you know, I think the CO2 ER story is a good story, clearly. But if we move to Morocco, we've got to remember also about Morocco that, you know, Morocco imports all their gas at present from Algeria. So that's hardly security of supply, of gas supply. Morocco has one of the best tax regimes in the world. We paid no tax on profits for 10 years. Gas price, you know, got an industrial market in Morocco that is demanding and crying out for gas and paying 2 to 3 times European prices and 4 to 5 times Trinidad prices. And of course, Trinidad is a country, believe it or not, we know very well after being doing business there for 6 years. We've got an infrastructure that has spare capacity, vast spare capacity, and links Morocco with Europe and not being utilized because there's no gas. We've got, what else have we got? We've got a government and a state oil company that is actually participates in helping you to develop gas. And yet I still hear a question, oh, why is Morocco valued at 10 times more than the recent discoveries in Trinidad? Yep, well, you know, read the RNS and weep. You can understand why it's valued more. All the metrics and valuation metrics are given there. And it's all about risk versus reward for a small company and our shareholders. You know, there is an element of risk, always in exploration, but you have to modify that with what the potential reward is. And you can see what the potential reward is in Morocco. You don't need to be a brain surgeon to understand the risk reward concept. Of course, if you never take a risk in your life, then you'll never be rewarded. So if you want to sit in your armchair and not even understand the concept of risk reward, well, go ahead, sit in your armchair, put a blanket around you, fine, no problem, you know. So let's move up to something else now. And that's Ireland and LNG Ireland. And all these serve to demonstrate how it fits into our strategy, how it fits into those opening lines, you know, in this interview as how we see things going and where the company is positioned. So Ireland is a case in point. LNG FRSU, floating regasification and storage unit. What we've seen recently in Ireland, on December the 5th, it was announced that electricity demand peaked between 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening at the highest ever recorded demand rate, you know, exceeding the last highest demand in 2010. All that energy is supposedly eventually to come from a renewable energy, but on that day, only 40% of the energy required was supplied by wind. The rest was supplied by gas. Most of that gas, as Corrib declines, will eventually come through and is coming through the interconnector from the UK. So in terms of security of supply, imagine your gas coming from somewhere in Europe, maybe, into the UK and onto Ireland. Well, is it going to be stopped at Moffat before it goes into Ireland so they can repackage it, so they can put different custom forms in it and then send it onto Ireland? Yeah, that's security of supply, isn't it? You know, so as the Dutch would say, you know, in terms of welcome to Brexit, my view is, yeah, welcome to Brexit, security of supply, and where you get your energy from, and particularly your gas from. So what also is going to happen in the next couple of years is that data services, data centers in Ireland are going to be using up to a third of all electricity generated. So in that time, of course, when that happens, the supply, the intraday demand for gas and electricity, particularly electricity, will not be satisfied by renewables alone. I mean, that's been proven already in December. So, you know, the politicians, are, of course, are promoting wind, you know, understandably, for different aspects. But it's not going to satisfy the transition to Ireland's energy needs on a day-to-day basis, peak demand basis, before renewables can completely produce 100% of demand on the day. And if you haven't got that security of energy supply, your data centers are not going to be built, your investment in new data centers is not going to be made, because you're not going to come up with a data center and then go down, because you can't get electricity on a particular time of the day because everybody's making tea. So it's, the FRSU project is defined and designed to basically fit that gap of interruptible supply, peak demand supply, and there is nothing else on the table at this point in time that can fulfill that demand in the next 3 or 4 years, which is the crunch in terms of the transition to renewable energy. So the politicians have an agenda, quite rightly, and a climate concern agenda, but we have to be pragmatic as to what steps we take to get there safely, securing our economies and providing security of energy supply. So all those 3 things sit into the scope of what we're trying to do as a company.
Thank you very much for letting us know what's going on with Predator, and also for your extremely interesting insights into the industry in general.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And thank you for watching Core Finance.